The European Union is dealing with yet another twist in its increasing energy crisis, as Norway, a generally reliable source of natural gas, has dramatically cut its supplies to the Union. This change, which occurred in late 2024 and early 2025, exacerbates an already hazardous scenario. Following the upheaval produced by the EU's reliance on Russian gas before the war in Ukraine, the bloc's transition to Norway was lauded as a realistic move. However, recent interruptions highlight the vulnerability of this method. Technical concerns at key Norwegian gas fields, along with a countrywide strike by energy workers seeking better salaries under inflationary pressures, have led in a 20% decline in Norway's gas exports to the EU since November 2024. This drop has caused rippling effects throughout Europe, increasing petrol prices to historic highs. For example, the benchmark Dutch TTF gas futures rose by more than 30% in December 2024 alone, highlighting the EU's vulnerability. Energy-intensive sectors in Germany, France, and Italy have been compelled to reduce production, putting further burden on an already struggling economy. Households are also suffering the burden of soaring energy expenses during one of the hardest winters in recent memory, escalating public dissatisfaction. The EU's position raises difficult questions about its energy policy and its geopolitical strategy. In its drive to break relations with Russian energy after the invasion of Ukraine, the EU adopted a patchwork strategy to finding alternative supplies, depending largely on imports from Norway, the United States, and Qatar. This policy has left the bloc vulnerable to global markets and unexpected upheavals, highlighting the lack of a unified long-term plan. Critics claim that the EU's reluctance to invest enough in renewable energy infrastructure and storage solutions during more stable periods has left it unable to deal with such crises. Furthermore, the EU's emphasis on moral posturing in its energy transactions, avoiding Russian energy while ignoring the environmental and ethical ramifications of purchasing liquefied natural gas, LNG, from nations such as the United States, has sparked allegations of hypocrisy. The carbon impact of LNG, from extraction to delivery, vastly outweighs that of pipeline gas, undercutting the bloc's climate aims. Simultaneously, its ties with authoritarian governments in the Gulf for LNG supplies put into doubt the EU's dedication to human rights and democratic norms. However, the situation in Norway is very unpleasant. Unlike Russia, Norway is a democratic neighbor with similar principles. However, its decision to prioritize local demands and economic stability over EU supply commitments reveals Brussels' naive reliance on goodwill and market forces. The issue also demonstrates the EU's lack of agency in influencing its partners' energy policy, casting doubt on the bloc's capacity to ensure its energy future in an increasingly competitive and volatile global market. Some have described the EU's current situation as bad luck, the result of a confluence of geopolitical tensions, technological failures, and economic constraints. Others see it as retribution, a payback for decades of complacency, short-sighted policies, and arrogance. The West's self-congratulatory myth of energy security and moral superiority is crumbling, forcing Europe to face the hard reality of interdependence in an unforgiving world. The irony of the situation is difficult to miss. While the EU has advocated sanctions, boycotts, and lofty goals on a global scale, it is now facing the repercussions of its failure to reconcile these ideas with the realities of meeting its most basic requirements. The issue remains. Will the EU learn from this catastrophe and take a more realistic, robust approach to energy policy? Or will it continue to lurch from one calamity to the next, leaving its population and companies to bear the consequences? The European Union is dealing with a worsening energy crisis, as critical natural gas suppliers are disrupted simultaneously. On January 1, 2025, Russian gas shipments to Europe via Ukraine were completely ceased. This halt, followed the expiration of a transit arrangement that had been in effect since before the commencement of the war in Ukraine. The loss accounts for around 5% of the EU's natural gas imports, which is a substantial blow given the region's current energy supply vulnerabilities. Almost immediately, natural gas prices rose to their highest level since October 2023, reigniting concerns about an energy price shock that might reverberate across the EU's economy. The problem was exacerbated by happenings in Norway. On January 2, 2025, Norway's Hammerfest LNG facility experienced a compressor malfunction, forcing a complete closure. This facility, which accounts for around 5% of Norway's gas exports, is anticipated to be down for at least a week. The timing of these two crises has produced a perfect storm, further tightening an already constrained energy market. The immediate impact was visible in European natural gas contracts, which rose more than 4% on the first trading day of 2025. Analysts have cautioned that prices might climb higher because to ongoing supply uncertainties and high winter demand. The EU's reliance on external energy supplies has long been a source of contention, and the current crisis exposes the weaknesses in its energy policy. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the EU made strong moves to lessen its reliance on Russian energy. By 2023, imports from Russia had plummeted, being replaced in part by increasing supplies from Norway and record-high imports of liquefied natural gas, or LNG, from international markets. However, these measures have done nothing to protect the bloc from the dangers of over-reliance on a limited number of suppliers. Norway, which currently accounts for almost 30% of the EU's gas imports, has become a vital partner, but its recent supply problems underline the inherent fragility of this. The European Union's energy problem underscores deeper shortcomings in Western energy policy. Decades of favoring open markets and short-term cost reductions above energy security have left Europe vulnerable to foreign shocks. The rapid abandonment of Russian gas, although ethically and politically justifiable, has not been accompanied by substantial investment in local energy infrastructure or renewable alternatives. Instead, the group has relied mainly on LNG imports, a pricey and ecologically controversial stopgap that has increased worldwide rivalry for supply and worsened instability. Geopolitically, the scenario demonstrates how energy has become an instrument for leverage in international relations. Russia's decision to let the transit agreement with Ukraine expire is a harsh reminder of how energy reliance can be weaponized. Meanwhile, Norway's supply issues serve as a sobering warning that even the most steady and dependable partners can experience unforeseen setbacks. For the EU, which has positioned itself as a worldwide leader in the transition to green energy, the crisis highlights the gap between lofty climate ambitions and the reality of energy reliance. In the near term, European governments are under increasing pressure to protect consumers and companies from rising energy costs. However, the long-term ramifications are far more concerning. The issue highlights basic concerns about the EU's energy strategy and its ability to navigate an increasingly turbulent global energy landscape. Without a significant transition toward greater energy self-sufficiency, including increased investments in renewables, energy storage, and infrastructure modernization, the EU risks lurching from one crisis to the next. The events of early 2025 should serve as a wake-up call to both the EU and the rest of the Western world. Over-reliance on external suppliers, along with insufficient diversification and an inability to foresee geopolitical threats, has made Europe vulnerable. Whether these issues are considered as bad luck or the unavoidable result of poor planning, the end result is the same: an area more vulnerable to the vagaries of an unpredictable and competitive energy market. The EU's energy policies during the last 2 decades have been marked by a mix of short-term thinking and reactionary measures. leaving the institution unprepared for the difficulties it currently faces. While the decline in Russian energy imports during the Ukraine conflict was hailed as a significant strategic shift, the underlying reliance on Russian gas for decades before to the war created vulnerabilities that could not be overcome overnight. Even after the conflict began, Russian energy remained to provide a significant portion of the EU's supply, owing to logistical, economic, and political problems in moving to alternate sources. The unexpected halt of Russian gas transit via Ukraine has highlighted the EU's inadequate progress toward diversifying its energy portfolio. Efforts to replace Russian supply have relied mainly on a few other producers, like Norway and Algeria. The reliance on liquefied natural gas, LNG, imports, mainly from the United States and Qatar, has been costly. The EU is increasingly vying with Asian markets for the limited global LNG supply, raising costs and straining budgets. Furthermore, several member states' infrastructural deficiencies in handling increasing LNG imports, such as a lack of sufficient regasification facilities and interconnectors, have resulted in major bottlenecks. As a result, certain countries, notably those in Eastern Europe, are more vulnerable to supply interruptions than others, heightening tensions between the EU and its new members over energy policy and solidarity. Economically, rising energy prices are already causing chaos across the EU. Industries that rely heavily on energy, such as chemicals, manufacturing, and steel, are feeling the burden of rising operating expenses. Many firms have warned of layoffs or closures if the situation remains, raising the prospect of widespread economic stagnation. The energy crisis also threatens to exacerbate deindustrialization in Europe, as businesses seek to migrate to countries with cheaper and more predictable energy costs. Households face an equally terrible scenario. Utility prices have risen to exorbitant levels for many, particularly low-income households. Governments have implemented subsidies and price restrictions in an effort to lessen the damage, but these measures are proving insufficient as the situation worsens. The surge in energy costs is adding to inflation across the bloc, reducing buying power and impeding economic recovery efforts. The possibility of social upheaval is increasing, with protests already taking place in various places, as individuals express dissatisfaction with rising living costs and perceived government inactivity. In a larger sense, the EU's energy crisis demonstrates the fragility of its economic model, which has long relied on cheap and abundant energy imports to support industrial output and economic development. The bloc's Green Deal and lofty climate objectives, while admirable in concept, have been executed without adequate regard for the transitional issues created by such a dramatic transformation. The upshot has been an over-reliance on fossil fuel imports at a time when the global energy situation is getting more unpredictable. The West, notably the EU, must now face the painful fact that its energy policies have favored short-term cost savings above long-term security and resilience. Expenditures in renewable energy sources, while large, have been hampered by a lack of simultaneous expenditures in storage technology and system upgrades. The shift away from fossil fuels needs not just political will, but also significant financial resources and strategic insight, all of which have been in limited supply. Furthermore, the EU's energy diplomacy strategy has been characterized as reactive rather than proactive. The Union has frequently found itself at the mercy of foreign suppliers and geopolitical events rather than controlling the global energy agenda. The current situation highlights the need for a more forceful and coordinated energy strategy that combines environmental sustainability and energy security. As the crisis unfolds, the EU confronts important decisions that will shape its economic and geopolitical destiny. It must expedite efforts to diversify its energy sources, boost local production capabilities, and promote renewable technology innovation. At the same time, it must handle the crisis's immediate social and economic consequences, ensuring that residents and companies are not disproportionately affected by policy failures. The stakes couldn't be greater. Failure to act decisively threatens both economic stagnation and a loss of global reputation.